So,
Okay.
want to start off with a little bit of the history behind the Enneagram?
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, the history of the Enneagram. So that's kind of actually a complicated thing because there's so many. It's hard, really, I think, to trace back a lot of the origins of the Enneagram because there's so many different influences, so many different places that have kind of contributed in some way. The actual symbol itself dates back about 2,500 years to the Greeks and Babylonians. They used the symbol itself, and they kind of use it for a numerical type of system. We don't know exactly what for, but that was kind of when we first see, like in literature and stuff like that, it show up. But then it kind of laid dormant for quite a long time before it kind of popped back up throughout history. And when it comes to Enneagram, there's two different parts. There's the actual symbol, and then there's this idea of there being 9 basic personality types. And so with the idea of maybe these personality types or these ego structures, that concept kind of came about in around the 5th century with the premise anyway was a guy by the name of Evagrius kind of came up with this idea of there being vices. It's in the Christian tradition. He talks about we all have these vices, and maybe there's one particular one that everybody maybe struggles with a little bit more. And the Catholic Church, through the ages, kind of tacked on this idea, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the 7 deadly sins. That kind of came out of this Evagrius character. And so as that progressed, there's been more kind of influence that have come and taken on to this idea of kind of having vices and this internal wiring that impacts the way that we see and do life. But when it comes to the symbol actually pops back up around 1900 in Russia by a guy by the name of George Gurdjieff. He was a philosopher. He was someone who kind of found the symbol and taught it actually as a path of self-actualization. So you kind of follow the life. You look at the symbol, it looks kind of weird. It does. And he kind of taught if you follow the lines along it, it's like kind of a path of personal development. And he kind of taught this theory and kind of using the symbol, not necessarily the idea of the personality, different types. But one of his students, Oscar Ichazo, took it in about the 1950s and took the symbol along with this idea of these vices, of these kind of character ego structures, and combine them to bring what we have.
1 second. So whenever you started talking about the Oscar guy in the 1950s, you started to break up a little bit. So can you maybe pick up back there real quick?
Yeah, sure. One of George Gurdjieff's students, Oscar Ichazo, then took this symbol and combined it with the idea of there being different vices and kind of everybody or characters or types of people have maybe one vice that they particularly identify with. And he combined them to come up with what we have today as the modern Enneagram personality system. And there's a 7 deadly sins, and he kind of added 2 more to that list. And so with the Enneagram, it's this idea of there being 9 basic character types, 9 different lenses through which we see the world and interact with the people around us and ourselves.
Cool. So like the Enneagram as we would probably recognize it today popped up around that time then with him.
Yes, with Oscar Charles, yeah. And the way that he described it, he when it first came out, he labeled it as, he would call it ego would be the first word, and the second word would be like ego, and then kind of like a descriptive word about what these types did or kind of how they saw the world. Over time, the language around each of those has evolved, as well as the theory deepened. And some of his students have kind of taken it and gone kind of further with it. And yeah, and so that's kind of an overview. There are definitely other origins of kind of, we see different things like with the Sufis and the Jesuits were also some people who kind of came upon this in some way. But Yeah, it really is kind of a muddied history. But there's kind of a recap at least.
Yeah. So, do you have any idea of like whenever? Well, I feel like it's kind of surged in popularity over the last few years. Do you have any idea of like why it kind of gained popularity maybe within the last decade or so, or is there any like insight onto why it started to kind of pop up more pervasively, I guess, in the public consciousness, I guess?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I have a definitive answer for that, because it definitely has, over, like you said, the past decade, really kind of come more into the public eye. I do think this idea of there being different personality types, and everybody wants to understand themselves and to understand the people around them. It's something that's a very intriguing idea. And so I think we love to talk about ourselves, right? So like I think this, for some reason, and again, I don't know that I can give you a definitive what brought this kind of forth, but I know before this, right, one of the big ones when it comes to personality types was the Myers-Briggs. And that was, I feel like it's dominated a lot of the personality talk and the kind of common perception of the common arena. But I feel like, again, like you said, over the past 5 or 10 years, the Enneagram has been kind of giving it a run for its money in those ways.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was super into the Myers-Briggs until I still think it can be helpful, but it's very different from the Enneagram. So I think that can lead into the next question, which is, in what way does the Enneagram differ from other like personality types? Because you have like Myers-Briggs, you have the one where it's like you're melancholy or caloric. I'm not sure what that one's called, but strength finder, all these different types of things. So
disc, that's another one that's
right.
Yeah.
So what sets Enneagram apart, and maybe the way it functions, and how does it function?
Right. I think for me, what really sets the Enneagram apart is this is not a behavioral system at all. And I think a lot of personality systems, it really is based on behavioral descriptions. And this type or this personality does this personality does this. What the Enneagram really gets at is why. Like, why do we do the things that we do? What are the motivations behind it? And I think that is just a very unique thing when it comes to the idea of personality and whatnot. And it gives it an element that I think is intriguing and gives it also a lot of depth. I think that's one of the most intriguing things for me with this process is when I first came upon the Enneagram, I started digging in a little bit, and I was like, okay, this seems pretty, interesting. This seems that something might be to this. And then I would run into a question, and so then I would dig a little deeper, and I'd be like, oh, okay, so this maybe explains like what this is. And then I'd run into another question I would have, and I would dig a little deeper, and the deeper I dug, the more I realized just how robust and full this theory is when it comes to the different personality types and the ways that it has a lot of allowance within each type. Again, there's these 9 basic types, but within it there's so much variation, which I think speaks to just how complex and dynamic we are as people. And I think I just really appreciate that allowance in this system. I think the other thing that can be really helpful that maybe sets it apart from some other ones is the idea and the opportunity for growth. With the Enneagram, there is a clear kind of idea of these are maybe some of your default patterns, your default ways of engaging with the world and the people around you. And while these defaults may never change, how bound to them you are, that is something that can begin to shift. We don't have to be, growing up, we become so identified with our personality, with these types. Like, this is who I am. What the Enneagram shows you is this is a part of who you are, but you are so much more than that. And as you become more aware of these things, you don't have to live out these patterns in ways that maybe are harmful or holding you back in some way. And so that idea and a direction of how can we to move beyond some of these things is a very hopeful and encouraging aspect that I think a lot of people really can get behind.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, so I guess one of the critiques I hear a lot from any sort of personality type or indicator is that it kind of puts people in a box. So do you think the Enneagram kind of subverts that in a way because it's not telling you about behaviors, it's kind of pointing you out of that one specific number or whatever? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no, I definitely do. So yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. A lot of people that when I'm talking about personality stuff, I hear that like I don't like personality stuff. It puts me in a box. Like I don't like that. And I read one time talking about the Enneagram, something that really stuck with me. And it says the Enneagram doesn't put you in a box. It shows you the box you're already in and how to get out. And I think that really does capture something that's very true about this system. There's a lot of truth and a lot of insight that can be gathered about ourselves and what's happening, but then that hopeful message of, but we don't have to stay there. And that is something really unique to the system.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. All right. So can you give like a very brief description of each person or each Enneagram number and like maybe a quick highlight of what makes them tick?
Yeah, definitely. So with each of the type, there's the theories based on the idea that there's 9 basic personality types. And kind of give, I guess, a little background before I talk about each of them. Kind of how the theory goes is that in childhood, we all experience different difficult things that we can't really explain, or struggles, or experiences that really impact us in some way. And so what happens is these experiences hit, and we need something to hold on to. And so what can happen is these beliefs can come up in us, these mottos, these mantras of like, if I just do this, if I'm just strong, I'll be okay. If I just kind of stand out, then I'll be okay. If I just kind of, fade in the background, I'll be okay. Again, these are these messages that come out. And as a kid, we identify with these, and these become our ways of coping with the world, with things not going the way that we want to. And it's really helpful. We need it. And at that age and the things that happen, like this is something that really is such a helpful and needed part of our development. What happens though is, again, we become so identified with these messages that as we grow older, something that once used to help us kind of survive and get our needs met now is restricting us in some way. I heard this example once that really stuck out to me. It's like our personality, each of these types forms around maybe some of these wounds that we have in childhood, like a cast. And some of us have maybe more wounds or more severe wounds. And so then the cast is almost like a full body cast, right? And we need it, right? It provides healing, it provides safety. But as we get older now, we find that we're constricted, right? The cast is now not allowing us to move in the way that we need to move. And so with the Enneagram, we can see how to begin to shed that cast that allows for that freedom of movement. Cool. So yeah, it's a little bit about, I think, how these things form. But I guess to get a little bit to each of the types, again, it's based on 9 different types, and it goes based on numbers. So numbers 1 through 9. For the type 1, there's different names for this. The reformer, the perfectionist, those are a couple of the common ones. For this type, there is a strong sense of right and wrong, a strong sense of there being a right way to do things. Typically, these people are pretty ethical, staunch or firm in their belief systems, whatever they kind of believe. This is kind of the ethic out of which I'm going to live. Typically, a sense of justice and fairness is very important to them. And they're typically pretty structured, orderly, want to make sure that things go a certain type of way. They at times can struggle with a little bit of criticism and criticalness towards the environment, towards the people around them, because things aren't how they should be, right? Like this is how it's supposed to be. Why aren't people, or why isn't the world doing what it's supposed to do? And we find that this criticism and this kind of frustration also very much can be directed towards themselves. And so it's almost this frustration and anger at themselves for, why am I not doing what I need to do? Why am I not living up to the standard that I hold so dear? And so this frustration can really be turn into a really harsh inner critic, a criticism of themselves that gets played out in their minds and can be very harsh. When we look at vice, every type again has a vice, and so for this type, the vice that shows up is anger. And again, it's in the form of this anger at the world for not being the way it should be, and anger at themselves for also not, and this kind of drive to continually better themselves and to better the world, but it never maybe quite being as it should. And so that's a little bit about the type 1.
Okay.
For the type 2, different names, the helper, the giver, those are a couple of the kind of monikers for them. This type is very big heart, very giving, supportive. Their relationships in their lives are very important, and this kind of drives a lot of their lives and the meaning that they attribute to it, wanting to be connected and to the people around them. Very empathetic, very much attuned to the needs of those around me, and a great desire to move into and to meet those needs. We find that some of the struggles that this type can have is there can be such an identification with I'm the helper, I'm the giver, that it can be a whole lot harder for them to in turn receive help. So it's like, no, I'm fine, I'm okay, and almost a denial at times of their own needs, or not kind of becoming aware of those, because that would mess with, again, this identity of I'm the helper. And so this in turn can kind of lead to the vice for this type, which is pride. And this pride can come out in a couple different ways. One, again, this, no, I'm the helper, I don't need help, I'm fine, but also almost a pride in how much they give to the people around them. Like I'm giving and giving, and I have a sense of goodness and the amount of care that I give to those around me. And that's again a little bit about the type 2. Mm-hmm. The type 3, again, a couple of the names: the achiever, the performer. This type is very hardworking, industrious, very goal and task oriented. They have an idea of the things that they want in life, and they're going to work hard to kind of achieve those things. And being successful at whatever they put their mind to is very important to them. And they get a lot of their identity from this, right? Like I can achieve the goals that I set, and whenever I get that checklist done, and whenever I complete the things that I'm working towards, there's a sense of accomplishment, but there's also a sense of, okay, what's next? There's not a lot of resting on the laurels for this type. Really, there's almost an addiction to the drive, right? So I reached it now. Okay, what's next? And it can be hard for this type to slow down. We find that with this type, when it comes to the vice, that what comes up for them is deceit. And this deceit is typically less so about deceiving others, but more about a deceit of themselves. So we find that if there is an identification with my value comes from what I do, from what I achieve, from how I perform, the 3 can very easily deceive themselves that who they really are is their performance. And what matters most is not the things I do, but how well I do them. And so they can become disconnected from their true heart, their true things that they love and are passionate about and value, and it becomes more about how can I accomplish the things that have been set before me. And so this deceit is a deceit of themselves, and in turn can become a deceit of others, right? Because they identify so clearly with, this is who I am, as this person who achieves, who performs. And so that's a little bit about the type 3.
Excuse me.
Yeah. For the type 4, this type, again, different names for it: the individualist, the romantic. There's a couple of the different names. This type are very empathetic. They are deep feelers. They're sensitive and very intuitive to the world around them. They have an eye for beauty, but also the sorrow of the world as well. These are the type of people who typically carry a little bit of melancholy around with them as well, because there's something sweet about just this sorrow, or about this sense of things being missing in the world. We find with them that this deep feeling can be something that's expressed outwardly, but also can be for some more of an inward thing, something that is not, you don't necessarily see on the outside, but something that's very common for them is a sense of longing, a longing for something that's missing. Something, if we only had this, or if I only had more of this, and a lot of times it's not materialistic. A lot of times it can be more characteristic, actually, or some vague thing that they're not really sure, but the sense of longing is something that they know very, very well. With this type, when it comes to a vice, we find the vice is envy, which I guess kind of matches this sense of longing, right? I'm longing for something that I don't have, and at times they can see something in others that they wish, like, oh man, if I just had this, right, this characteristic, or man, why is it so easy for these people, or man, look at how good they are at that. Like, I wish I had something like that, and feeling like at the core maybe that there's something's missing inside of them, and if they could just have that, there would be a sense of completeness or wholeness that they feel like they're missing. It's a little bit about the type 4.
So I remember we did an Enneagram thing at my work, like a little workshop, and we were going through each type and looking at famous examples, and so many 4s were, musicians, artists, and then so many of them committed suicide. And I think it's just probably related to that longing for something that they probably thought that they couldn't find, in this life, I guess. So it's kind of, man, it's like, yeah, it's cool to see the beauty, but it's also probably a heavy experience. Probably too much to bear for some people.
Yeah. I that's a very familiar thing. You think of the romantic, the individual, those are some of the names, but a lot of times that the type 4, there is a creative flair to them. So a lot of artists you would find, like, there's an ability, their focus of attention on what's missing. And so they're able to see a blank canvas and fill it in with what's missing is this maybe creative expression. What's missing is, man, if we just added a little bit more of this to this culinary dish, like, this would make it perfect. If we added a little bit of this to this song, we would be able to capture something that's so beautiful. And so again, this sense of what's missing can be something very creative in its expression, but when applied to the whole of life, can again leave a sense of like loss or a sense of sorrow. I've heard this expression before, just in general growing up in I guess the evangelical church, but they talk about, there's a God-shaped hole in all of our hearts. And when I think of that, I think of the type 4, and I think maybe we all experience a sense of like longing for something that we need for fulfillment. But I think the 4s, man, they feel that so much deeper than the rest of us. Yeah.
Cool.
One side note,
mm-hmm.
I'm just like plowing through it. Are you one to ask questions after each of these?
No. I'm probably just going to edit all this together, in the video anyway. So I'm just trying to keep it as like, segmented as possible.
Okay.
Like responding as much, but yes, I'm just wanting your own feedback. I'm not really looking for anything outside of that. So just keep on going, man. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, because when he started talking about the 4, I was like, oh wait, is he wanted like kind of?
No. I was kind of wanting to go through them as quickly as possible, but
okay.
I just had to add that. But
yeah, no. That's great. So yeah, I'm taking my cues from you. So you just if you want to interrupt or interject, then you go for it.
Sounds good. So number 5.
Yes. So then we have the type 5. The type 5, again, different names: investigator, the observer. For this type is typically more analytical, objective. There is a kind of a cerebral nature to this type, and they're very much people who are thinkers in a lot of different ways. And we find that when it comes to the world and how they interact with it, it's typically one of kind of hanging back a little bit and taking information in and then kind of processing. And they're not ones that are going to be quick to action and jumping into situations like, let me gather all the information, all the input before I make a decision. Have a quick mind and an ability to really go deep in a lot of different subjects or ideas or topics, and they can be really kind of brilliant in those ways. But there also can be, since there is such a mental acuity with this type, there can be at times a difficulty in being able to access or interpret more of the emotional world for them. Not that they don't have emotions by any means, but it can just be more of a foreign place, much more comfortable in their heads than kind of accessing and expressing those things. And we find with this type that it's also just kind of a little bit easier maybe to be. They need their time. They need their space. When I think of an introvert, I think of 5s. Like, maybe not all 5s are introverts, but at the very least, most 5s are introverts, because there is also very much a sense of I have a limited amount maybe of time or of energy, and I need that time and space to recharge. When it comes to the vice for this type, we find that the vice is avarice. And how that is expressed as avarice is almost kind of a greed in a sense. And how this is expressed for this 5 is not necessarily materialistic. Actually, 5 a lot of times can be very simple when it comes to the material things in their life, but a lot of times it's more of a hoarding almost of their internal world. These are my emotions. These are my internal world. I don't necessarily want to share this with others unless maybe I trust you. And even then, it's like I want to hold this dear to me and tight. And it also can be a hoarding of themselves. I just don't know that I can, go to this social engagement. I don't know that I have the energy to give to go and do these different things. And so I want to conserve this. I want to almost kind of hoard my being and my internal world as well. And that can be how the vice shows up for the type 5.
Yeah.
For the type 6, the loyalist, the loyal skeptic, 2 of the names for them. This type is very grounded, very conscientious, hardworking, loyal. These are your typical company man or woman. You can trust them to do a good job, to get the job done, to be thorough, and to just like very grounded, trustworthy people. You're not going to find a lot of pretension in these type of people. And there's just something so I guess comforting from these type of people. We find though that underneath it there can be a decent amount of anxiety, and a lot of this anxiety comes from a focus of attention on maybe the possible things that could go wrong, where there's safety, security are things that are big buzzwords for this type. Like they're very much concerned with those things and want to protect themselves in some way. And we find internally for this type there can be almost a constant struggle for them, and there can be a lack of a confidence maybe in their own decision making or their own sense of what to do. And so a lot of times we find them looking to authority figures for guidance or for reassurance. And a typical almost pattern that can happen with a type 6 with stuff is feeling okay, good, I got this, is good, and then but what about this? There's also this. And then they think through this. And so then they jump to the other side and they're, okay, we got it. This is good. But no, what about this part? And again, this kind of constant back and forth within them, which kind of this self-doubt can kind of show up. And we find for the vice for this type, the vice is fear. And it's this fear of what could go wrong. It's a fear of the potentialities of there being a lack of safety or security, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whatever it is, and this kind of fear that the type 6 is acting out of it. And there can be 2 different expressions. One expression is they call it the phobic 6, which is very much kind of I want to make sure all my bases are covered and I'm good to go, and I'm going to kind of respond to this fear by being prepared. And then they have the counterphobic. And the counterphobic 6, the fear is very present. But how this type of 6 interacts with that fear is, well, I'm going to rush right into it. I'm gonna match it. The defense strategy for a counterphobic 6 is offense is the best defense, right? I'm just going to run right into it. And so a lot of this type of 6 maybe isn't even aware of how much fear is a driving force for them, because they're just so used to I'm going to be the aggressor. I'm going to be the one who kind of meets it. But underneath it, again, is very much aware of this fear of the things that could go wrong or the bad things that could happen. Next, we have the type 7. It's the enthusiast, the epicure. This type is typically very energetic, a wide range of different things that are interesting to them, and they love, just so many different ideas and topics. For them, being able to enjoy just the different variety in life is very important to them. Freedom to the possibilities. There's so many possibilities in life, and a joy for being able to explore each of those is very important to them. We find with this enthusiasm for life and wanting to enjoy it, that there can at times be almost this sense of, ooh, this is great. I'm doing this. This is really a cool thing. And then like, but what about this? And kind of like a losing focus or kind of getting distracted by something else. The allure, kind of like a shiny object off in the distance. Oh, let me go jump to this. And so the follow through can be a little bit harder for this type because sticking with whatever commitments they have can feel really what it gets to is confining. It can feel restricting. This is encroaching on my ability to have some sense of freedom. And there's a fear of that freedom being restricted for this type that's very present. And when we get to the vice for this type, we find that the vice is gluttony. And this is not in the ways that we typically think about gluttony as far as food, but really it's a gluttony for, give me the good things in life. Give me all the good. I don't want the bad, the painful, the boring, the things that are just dull. I don't want that. I want the good things. And so they can almost live a life at times that can be seeking only those things to the denial of the reality of life isn't always happy, right? Life is not always pleasurable. But man, the type 7 would really love it if their world was full of those things. And that's a little bit about the type 7. The type 8, the challenger, the protector. This type is very, they're natural born leaders. They are powerful, they're strong, they're assertive, they're a presence. Like people just, they know when a type 8 is in the room, and there's just something about them that kind of commands attention. And these people are really wonderful at being able to spearhead projects, to get things moving and going, and they can do some really incredible things. At the same time, having a personality that is so big and forceful at times can cause some havoc in the world around them. Because a lot of times they don't even realize the strength with which they live their life, and at times it can be almost too much for the people around them. And so other people can maybe get hurt in the 8 just trying to live their life in their world. We find the vice for this type is lust. And again, not the way that we typically think about lust as far as sexuality, but a lust for control. And this control that is really important for the 8 is, it's less about just, I want the control for control's sake, but it's really about this fear of being controlled. It's a fear of being hurt or harmed. So if I'm the one who's in control, nothing bad can happen. If I'm the one who's in control, then this fear of something bad, someone doing something to me or taking that control from me is gone. And so this can be something that's played out in the different areas of the 8's life. And then we have, lastly, we have the type 9, the peacemaker, the mediator. This type is very laid back, go with the flow. They're very accommodating, peaceful people. They're people who want harmony and peace internally in their world, but also in the environment around them. Very empathetic and able to see the different sides of different arguments or different discussions, and really want to bring that peace to the world around them. We find that with this type, since there is such an ability to see the different sides, to be able to empathize with other people, what can be more difficult is being connected to themselves. So what do I think? What do I believe? How do I feel? Because this type can so easily default to the environment around them, default to, okay, this is what we're doing, well, then I'm going to kind of go along with this. And even if there are some things that are more grounded within them, there's a lot that's maybe a little bit more fuzzy for them, that's harder for them to figure out. We find with this type that the vice is sloth. And really this sloth, how it's expressed, is not necessarily a physical thing, while at times it can be, but it's really more of a sloth or a falling asleep to themselves. It's not giving themselves the time or the energy to figure out who I am and what I value and what I want, and really valuing that enough to invest in. And so it's a falling asleep to who they really are, as opposed to going along with the environment, what's comfortable, or keeping the peace around them. And that's a little bit of how the type 9 navigates the world.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really good. That's probably like as detailed but as quick as you can describe all 9. Like it's so hard to just like compact, a description of each one because there's so much nuance to each one. But
Yeah.
that was awesome. So I guess the last couple of questions. One, I guess we can kind of like combine them. Would be number one, how you're a counselor, so like how do you use Enneagram in your counseling, and how is that done on other professional levels as well? And then related to that, what draws you to the Enneagram, and why do you use it in your counseling?
Yeah. I think for me, as far as the allure of the Enneagram, it's really something that for me was never intended to be a tool or something that I used with as a therapist, as a marriage and family therapist. I work with couples, I work with individuals, and helping them better relate or move into more or better health. But for me, when I came upon the Enneagram, it really was more about, I guess, my own inner exploration. I found it, and there was something about it that really resonated with me and my own experience that made me think maybe there's something to this. And as I dug deeper, it began to uncover different things inside of me that I didn't even realize. And that was what hooked me. That's what intrigued me and brought me deeper in, and it opened up a world, my own world, right? My own internal world that began to add language and meaning that I just did not have before. And as that personal exploration began and continued, I began to realize, wow, this is such an incredible tool that can help other people enter into this same journey that is coming to know ourselves and coming to know the people around us. And I think for me, when it comes to using the Enneagram or offering the Enneagram and the different capacities that I use, again, whether it's counseling, I also do workshops and I do coaching with people as well with the Enneagram. I found that this really is a tool for compassion and understanding, because when we understand ourselves and we understand other people, we then can move in with compassion. It's so easy with ourselves to be so judgmental and harsh with ourselves, but we can understand that these are some ingrained patterns that have been there for as long as we can remember. There can maybe be a little bit more of that self-compassion, as well as the compassion with others, right? People do stuff all the time that we're like, oh my gosh, that drives me up a wall. But with the Enneagram, we can understand, oh, okay, maybe I understand that a little bit more, right? Maybe there's this fear here or this insecurity here. And instead of that judgment and that condemnation, there can be more of that grace and understanding. And I think for me, encountering that personally, it made me, I want to share this with the people around me. And so, again, I use it in different capacities in counseling to help couples, again, just better understand themselves and the patterns that show up personally, but then also in their relationship, right? We all have our insecurities and our fears, and the Enneagram can be a wonderful map to better understand those. And what better tool or guide than this system to help know how to navigate communication, to navigate connection and intimacy. And so I know with couples, this can be just such a valuable tool, as well as individuals, right? Just like this impacted me so much in understanding myself and the patterns that show up and what growth really looks like, being able to share that and help guide people along in that journey of self-discovery and journeying towards health is something I love to be a part of. And so that's a little bit of how I use it, as well as, again, with groups. I also work with teams and organizations and nonprofits going into a team environment. And I mean, the same stuff that I'm talking about with individuals and couples, applying those same dynamics to how can we help us better understand and bond as a team and work well together, work in a healthy environment that's going to help us reach the goals that as an organization we really want to accomplish.
That's awesome, man. Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Is there anything you would add specifically? Maybe some good resources for doing some more further research?
Yeah. I think there's a couple websites that I refer most people to kind of, if they're wanting just to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And that is EnneagramWorldwide.com. That is my training. I'm a just about to finish up certification as a teacher in the narrative Enneagram. So my training is through Enneagram Worldwide, the organization. And then the other is EnneagramInstitute.com. That's another one of the main schools of kind of training teachers. Both of those websites have valuable information, and kind of if you are wanting to learn more, you can go to those resources. And then outside of that, there's plenty of podcasts. I think the Path Between Us, the Enneagram Panels podcast, the Road Back to You, Typology. Those are different podcasts that you can maybe look into. And then for books, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, The Complete Enneagram, those are good, kind of more in depth. The Road Back to You, The Path Between Us, those are good kind of more introductory type things with a Christian perspective. And then Personality Types is another one that's kind of an in-between both of those two, as well as The Sacred Enneagram and a Christian perspective on the Enneagram. So that's actually kind of a lot, but if you are interested,
a lot of tools,
there's a lot of different things that you can really kind of dive into, as well as there are, part of my journey was very much listening to the podcast, reading the books, like doing all that. But then I started going to workshops.
Yeah.
And that's what really made a lot of this stuff come alive for me. So that if you do know of one that's happening, being a part of one of those can be such a valuable experience. And the Enneagram Institute offers some, the narrative Enneagram, they offer some of those. So yeah, that's something else that can help deepen the understanding of this.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah.